Hello, and here we are. We're back. It's Radio Against Repression on the hour. I'm very proud and pleased to be joined in the studio again with, of course, Yara Nassar.
Hi.
And we have with us today Lucho from BDS FU and Interbündnis Berlin.
Hello.
Hello. And, of course, down the line, we have Zoë Claire Miller. How's it going, Zoe?
Hey, hello, comrades. Okay.
Okay, good. Yeah, I was almost thinking maybe we should do a little check-in. How's everyone doing? I normally feel like the earth is about to open up in front of me before we go on air. But then when we go on air, it all seems to somehow make sense and cohere again. Everyone all right?
As fine as you can be being in Berlin, I guess.
Yeah, I guess as good as one can be under this country. I'm quite happy about the snow, actually.
Yeah.
I am a winter child.
I definitely
do
appreciate your presence in the studio, keeping me at least a little bit warmer and keeping us all a bit warmer.
Yeah, for everyone listening, Alex is wearing his full winter jacket because it is kind of cold in the studio. It is 8 degrees below zero in Berlin right now.
Yeah, I found these really cool ear warmers and I can hear you speaking through them. It's weird.
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, so there's not much time today and we've got a lot going on and a lot of topics to get over. So obviously we've had the Academic Boycott Conference last weekend. All of you were there in different capacities. We're going to jump into a couple of clips which Yara is reporting on the ground, and we will then follow up with a discussion. And of course, in the end, we're going to do our spotlight on Iran. So thanks for being with us today, and stick with us, stay tuned, keep it locked.
I'm Lucas Febraro. I'm a campaigner for BDS, for Palestinian human rights, and we're at the Academic Boycott Now conference here in Berlin, and we just had a panel on the necessity of BDS today. Great to be here at Boom again and see a wonderful room for an important discussion like that. I mean, BDS is a movement launched and still led by the absolute majority of Palestinian society, the largest coalition in Palestinian society. So there's that. There's the fact that this is a global movement, but it's Palestinian-led by this extremely broad coalition, which I think is very important. Also equally important is that it's a movement based on international law and that centers Palestinian self-determination by ending the occupation, full equality in Palestine, and a right to return of Palestinian refugees. These are all enshrined in international law, and BDS is based on ending complicity in order to make sure that we bring enough pressure on Israel and on its regime of settler colonialism to end the oppression of Palestinians, so that those rights are guaranteed, and that expresses itself in a multitude of different campaigning areas, and an extremely important one are the academic and cultural boycotts. Israeli institutions of higher learning are all deeply entrenched and complicit in the oppression of Palestinians, and so it is our duty, the duty of our institutions on international law, to make sure that they are not complicit in cooperating with them, in boycotting them, and our duty as people, as students, to make sure that we bring pressure on them to make that happen.
Hello, I'm Shahinaz Ghinid. I'm Egyptian American. I'm an international human rights lawyer. I'm a social science PhD student, and I am also a long-time human rights organizer and activist. I've been organizing for the Palestine movement for over 10 years now, and I am currently PACB's international campus coordinator, and I support on all kinds of campus organizing, whether by students, staff, faculty, or higher education unions.
That's amazing. That's such important work. I want to ask you about one term that you used yesterday when you were speaking on a panel about BDS, and the term you used was movement defense. Can you explain for the listeners what movement defense is?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the panel yesterday, I was talking about how across the whole Palestine movement, there's different sorts of struggles besides BDS, and that groups really need to think about where their capabilities are and what of those that they want to dedicate time towards and develop strategy around. And so I listed as well movement defense as something that groups might want to consider strategizing around. And movement defense is broadly a term that mostly I've seen used by lawyers and legal scholars, and it talks about this idea of these kinds of professionals, also people in like the policy space and otherwise, coming together to do work in the legal and policy space that protects social movements to actually allow them to be able to do their work. So standing up for academic freedom, standing up against repression, doing strategic litigation on these issues, all of that would kind of fall under the umbrella of movement defense work.
Amazing. What would you say is the most important target if we're thinking about academic boycott that, let's say, European Palestine solidarity movements should be focusing on right now?
Yeah, right now, if you're in Europe, absolutely the most important target for academic boycott is the Horizon Europe program. It is part of the EU-Israel Association Agreement, which many people have been organizing and calling for to be suspended in light of the violations of Article 2 of the agreement, the Human Rights Clause. And so Horizon Europe would be implicated in that. And we have seen at this point, since the genocide began, dozens of universities that have pledged to reevaluate their academic ties, ensure that they are having ethical academic ties, and as part of that to withdraw from Horizon projects. And we've also seen Israel's share in the Horizon Europe program of approved applications decreasing really drastically during that time as well. And all of this money is going into Israeli academia, which, as we know, is complicit in supporting the Israeli government and military in colonialism, apartheid, genocide, and so many other violations of international law. So this is a really key way that European institutions and people in European academic institutions can support the academic boycott.
And last question, what would you say to student groups who have been fighting for, both for obviously Palestine liberation, but also just for in general more democratic governance of universities and just like universities and higher education that is for the people and not for, the institution, and that have been faced with quite a lot of repression, especially here in Germany. People sometimes feel a bit dejected and hopeless. What would you say to them?
I think that's definitely understandable given the intense repression faced here, and I'm seeing people at this conference really starting to think very strategically about movement defense and about how to handle repression, which I think is great. It's a really good sign. And then in terms of the democracy component of it, I think that the struggle of Palestine is really, as some people have said, a litmus test or kind of the thread that unravels the entire broader colonialist project that many different countries are engaged in. And so it has exposed a lot of the ways in which institutions may talk about liberal, human rights focused, international law focused policies, but not actually enact those or really commit to them. And they might talk about democracy, but they're repressing the popular will of the people that is really across the world at this point in support of Palestine. And so I think these struggles go together, and we've seen really great work that groups have done to try to shore up democracy in their universities, in their unions, in their municipalities, provinces, countries even, in response to the fact that they have been repressed, even though the popular feeling and sentiment is really in favor of Palestine across the board. And I think that's only going to make all of these societies stronger and better and more ethical in the long run.
So, welcome back to the studio. You just heard 2 clips that were field recordings from the Academic Boycott Conference that took place here in Berlin on January 23rd to 25th. Organized by the Interbündnis mainly. And really discussed this idea of academic boycott, and I was there and did some field recordings. So you just heard Lucas Febraro, and you heard Shahinaz, who is the leader of PACB, which stands, or the campus leader of PACB, which stands for Palestinian Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel. And we are very happy to today be joined in the studio by Lucho from BDSFU and from Hello, Lucho. And from Interbündnis, and you were one of the organizers of this conference. And let's talk academic boycott. What is it? Why do we need it? Give us the overview.
Okay. Well, thank you first for the invitation. To understand why academic boycott is a potent political measure, like against the genocide, I think it's important to go first to what is the character of the Israeli economy, very briefly. Israel spends around 6% of the GDP in R&D, which is it's the most like the country that allocates most of the GDP like to science in the world.
What is R&D?
Research and development.
Oh,
Yes.
that's good. See, I am in university, but I don't know all these academic terms.
It's fine. And then the thing is, like, also there, like 92% of this like allocation goes particularly through like private corporations. Israel also has a whole infrastructure, like institutional infrastructure, to overtake functions of commercialization, networking, and logistics of applied research. So it's basically like what they do is they don't develop what is called basic science, like mostly, which is like, let's say, the principles of AI, or the principles of like how cells work, but they actually move that kind of like more general understanding of how the world operates towards specific applied products. And surprise, surprise, maybe you can guess in what kind of particular applied science they do, right? They are mostly focused on defense and police.
So-called defense.
Yes, let's say it's weapons. It's weapons, it's technology, it's arms technology, or it's surveillance technology, and so on. And they actually even have a special position in the IDF, which is his whole function is to look at the research that's being done and bring it towards military companies. Actually, the person who is doing it has a name. He's called like Jacob Nagel. He works in the Technion, and his title is Brigadier General Professor, right? So it brings like the military like title with the academic title together. So you can see how like the question of academia and research in Israel is not only like a base question of like the abstract pursuit of science, but it is actually like a military question, right? I mean, this is what like feeds Israel capital. This is what it feeds like Israel like a military industrial complex. So now,
it's a nation on a permanent war footing, I think is a description.
And it's interesting because like, I mean, Israel is not like mass producer of weapons. Let's say like their share in the global arms market is like 2%, 3%. Like the last figure I have is from 2022 was 2.1%. But it is about like developing specific infrastructure to use the weapons, right? So they don't produce the missiles, but they produce like the Iron Dome. They don't produce like drones. They produce the infrastructure, the framework to operate them.
And I mean, a lot of the actual missiles and stuff are produced in Germany, the UK, and the US.
And that's why that's why like you have this paradox that like Israel is a weapons manufacturer that like needs to be sent weapons, right? Yeah, and just before.
Well, at the rate that they're using them up.
Yeah, but they are not mass producers. Let's say like they don't have the capacity to produce like this amount of weapons by themselves. And just shortly to jump in, like the power of an academic boycott here is that this is basically the connection with international academia is what fuels like Israeli capitals. So I would say it's not only an ethical position to like require your universities to like cut ties with Israeli academia. It has an actual political and economic effect on Israel. This is leverage. This is leverage, and we can direct this leverage against Israel. Like academic boycott has potency.
To keep the conversation in the rounds, Zoe, you've also been at the conference last weekend. What was your impression? And perhaps there is a relationship with the work that you're doing at Crisol that frames the way that you kind of experienced it there.
Yeah, I have to say that I followed most of the conference through Zoom and only made it over for a very short visit. But I was really, really impressed by how energetic and powerful and forward-looking and positive the vibes were. And it seemed like it was very full, and like everyone did an amazing job of handling the attempts by police to enact repression. And When I first heard that this conference was being planned, my immediate thought was, oh no, don't do it in Berlin. They're going to do the same thing to you that they've done to, the Palestine conference. They're going to, use all tools of police violence possible and to kind of quash this, to keep it from happening.
Yeah.
So I'm really amazed that it worked out so well. I think that also the press strategy that was used was very, very effective. Of course, there was some demonization and defamation in the press, but the communication strategy really didn't offer much target area.
What was the press strategy? Could you elaborate that? Because for me, it's quite fine grain in the movement. Actually, what does that mean when you say the press strategy?
Well, I wasn't involved in the internal team, so I guess that Lucho actually has to tell us about it.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are two factors that are like really interesting on the press strategy. From our side, what we wanted to transmit, that this was like an event which was basically going to bring, it's a movement building event. It's not just like a sort of neutral academic conference, first of all. And then to push forward like a particular political strategy, which is like the academic boycott, right? So there would be like, of course, panels and so on to openly discuss it, but part of the meeting would be closed, and it would be like to discuss like from between the different groups. And we try to frame like this in terms of like, we put forward very clearly like the conditions we were like going to use to enforce like the academic boycott, which are the PACB conditions, because we knew this was going to be like the first counter argument, you are discriminating Israelis and so on. So basically on all our press, in all our relationship with the press, it's always like, this follows the PACB guidelines, and particularly the PACB guidelines distinguish very clearly between what is called like an institutional boycott and an individual boycott. Because like the academic boycott is an institutional boycott. We are calling institutions and we are boycotting particularly institutional ties, but that doesn't mean that we are targeting individual Israeli academics, except in cases where they are like a spokesperson for like institutions, or where they act as like normalizers of like the genocide and the occupation.
Like with the rest of BDS, it's not about identity, it's about complicity. It's not about like, oh, this person is Israeli, so we boycott them.
Sure.
Or even worse, this person is Jewish, so we boycott them. It's about, oh, this person is, or mostly with this institutional boycott, this institution is actively engaged in knowledge production that goes to the IOF, for instance. And that is what you are calling and what PACB is calling to boycott, if I understand correctly.
Exactly. And just one more thing, like, in terms of like press strategy, I think it actually, it's a huge project, but I think it actually benefited us that like there's so much censorship around discussing BDS. I think most of the media covered us very fairly because they don't know what actually BDS is. So you see like media like Tagesschau, like talking about the PACB guidelines, even though like the framing was Zionist and so on, but they were like transmitting fairly, let's say, like the PACB guidelines. I was like, what is happening? Like there's something shift. And I actually think they are ignorant. They don't know what BDS actually means. So they just like, they received our message and they repeated it without being actually aware of the kind of stuff that they were transmitting. Like even the most critical coverage like transmitted fairly the PACB guidelines. This was like very surprising for me.
Oh, I don't know if I agree with that, because I mean, congratulations, yes, but I saw some very bad coverage afterwards in FAZ. And there was this idea of like, oh, it's not an academic conference if like any part of it is closed, which is absurd. And it's not an academic conference because it has a political motive, which is also absurd.
But also, like, if it's distinguished because it's actually the exception, this is good.
And also, I would say it was a political conference. Like I wouldn't dispute that.
No, I'm not saying it's not a political conference. I'm saying that just because something is political, that doesn't mean that it's not also academic. Like, it's absurd to act as if there's this quote unquote neutral space, because there isn't, an academic conference that cuts out Palestine is just as political as one that includes it.
But the thing, this question of neutrality is really a discursive tool of the far right. So in German, there's this term Neutralitätsgebot, like kind of pledge or obligation to neutrality, which really, I think, only specifically applies to bureaucrats, to people who are hired by the state, work for the government. But this is being instrumentalized and weaponized against all kinds of workers, of pedagogues, as kind of a justification for saying, well, this doesn't follow the lines of neutrality. It's especially being launched against, any kind of emancipatory, LGBTQ, queer, or also anti-genocidal discourse. So this is really something that you can tell is like seeping in from the far right into German mainstream.
I mean, as an example, in Bavaria, you are not allowed to, or different. I'm not sure if they still have that law, but for a while, it was like you're not allowed to wear a hijab as a teacher because that is seen as or claimed to be not neutral. But you are allowed to wear like a little cross necklace because that is somehow more neutral. And you're even
in Bavaria, they have crosses hanging in the classroom.
You're mandated in some parts to have crosses in the classroom because that is somehow argued like that's not a sign of a religion, because it is the mainstream hegemonic religion. So it's like it's neutrality is used as a tool of power.
Yeah. If I could jump in, I was doing the transfer to the new host for the podcast. So anyone listening, please research Radio Against Repression in your podcast app and you'll see there's a slightly different artwork. And I was going through the shows and kind of putting them in again, and I noticed that it was almost exactly a year ago that we founded this project around the so-called anti-Semitism education resolution. And then we went on to talk about hate speech and insult law not very long afterwards. So we're sort of in that wheelhouse at this point where it's like, yes, there is a freedom of speech discourse, but it is always there to uphold the powers that be and maintain the status quo as it is.
Maybe a question for both you, Lucho, and Zoe, whoever of you wants to take it first. Have you seen a shift in academia and the academic sphere, especially in this last year since this, education resolution was released that really calls universities to shut down any not state mandated talk about Palestine, and also quite explicitly calls universities and schools to work with the police to police and shut down dissent. Has there been a shift since that, or has everything already, how is it currently within the academic sphere to try to talk about Palestine, BDS, genocide, all of these related topics?
May I jump in first?
Yeah, Lucho, go first.
Okay.
Sure,
go for it.
Well, I mean, from the student side, it's very clear that this is not having an effect. I would say the opposite. I saw the experience of the FU. I started in 2023. We had two collectives in the academic in the student senate who were broadly pro-Palestine. Yeah, they were pro-Palestine actually. And today, the whole student senate is pro-Palestine in the FU. Yeah, all the ASTA is also like pro-Palestine. I saw like this huge shift like in the student side.
That was not the case when I was at FU a couple of years ago, so that's great.
Yeah, I know. This has like shifted very quickly. And from the academic side, I would say like the universities are maneuvering. I saw this particularly in the FU. In the FU, they started panels or discussion rounds on Palestine, but trying to look for like a political or historical subjects on Palestine that kind of did not address the current situation. So there was like this Ringvorlesung that talked about, like literature in the 19th century in Palestine, stuff like that. Like let's say in beginning of 2024. So everything was like, so they are trying to maneuver that because this like the accusations of censorship are actually having an effect, I think. not only like from academics here, but also like abroad, people are talking about it. When Germans go abroad, they face panels where like everyone is talking like in a very different atmosphere about Palestine, and it just feels off. Yeah, this is what I would say from my side. But the university itself is not taking any kind of steps or let's say material actions against, like in connection with Israel or the Israeli academia. I mean, our first demand in beginning November 2023, when I got detained, like in the first occupation, was please bring down the Israeli flag from your Instagram post. That was the only
Apropos
thing.
neutrality again.
Like, just take out the fucking post with the Israeli flag. And I think it's still there. It's still there. So they are not making any kind of concession, but they are trying to maneuver to, not lose the position of internationals coming. Yeah.
I think that my impression is maybe a little bit biased because on the one hand, I have to admit I'm in a little bit of leftist and anti-racist and pro-humanitarian international law bubble, whereas there's, of course, also a significant part of German academia that is fully dedicated towards a regressive, reactionary, and right-wing agenda. But I definitely would say that at the same time that we can see that this Bundestag's the resolution is being effective in terms of individual federal states reforming their university laws to enact more repressive measures, to make it easier to kick students out of school. Sometimes in some of the law drafts that are up right now, also in the case just of suspicion, of reasonable suspicion, not even of having been proven to have done anything wrong. So there's some very, very harsh new legislation in the works incoming. Some of it has already been realized. But I think that you can definitely feel a bit of a shift in terms of university leadership realizing that the repression that they're enacting is going to prove to be a tool or already is being a tool that will attack both and damage both their university autonomy, their institutional autonomy, and academic freedom at large. So I think that there's some growing awareness around that, but perhaps not much in terms of bravery and courage and strategies, willingness to face this and to make any changes around it. I feel like the pressure that's coming from the government is so intense to engage with and expand academic cooperations with Israeli universities. And I mean, just in the level of these gigantic weapons deals that have been made between the two states. Of course, this also relates then to institutions of science and of research.
I mean,
Yeah.
one current example of a collaboration, at least through, like personally, is at the TU, the Technical University in Berlin. There's this Decoding Anti-Semitism research project that is, don't nail me down on the details, but it's researching or trying to build a LLM, like a large language model, an AI chatbot, basically, that is intended to scour social media for what it considers to be quote unquote anti-Semitic hate speech. And this project is being led by someone who has, among others, studied at the Hebrew University Jerusalem, which is it's an Israeli university on occupied East Jerusalem land, which, part of the West Bank that's occupied land under international law, and Israeli university has no business being there. But he's the head of this project, and this project is using a very politically instrumentalized idea of anti-Semitic hate speech, and that is set to be it's being researched right now at TU, obviously also always with money from. Not as much, in the U.S., the thing with the students really was like, hey, we're paying $30,000 a semester. We don't want our money to go to these Israeli universities that are aiding and abetting a genocide. But in Germany, and that's taxpayer money, that's all of our money. And through these European collaborations, Israel is getting our tax-paying money to fund their research on all kinds of weapons manufacturers, but also on these sort of censorship projects.
Yeah, there's always these different scales. We don't have tons of time left, but anecdotally, it's always different when someone tells you about something that's happened directly to them, right? So I have a friend whose daughter is in Minnesota at the moment, and she was like, yeah, she's a kilometer away from these two public extrajudicial executions by the German Gestapo, by the United States Gestapo, Freudian slip. And it was just suddenly completely changed. And I have another friend in Berlin who's studying at university who I also won't name, and they're active in the movement. And I was like, how's it going? What are you up to? And he was like, yeah, well, we're trying to get the university to make a statement. So, of course, we had to go through the anti-Semitism commissioner. And it was just suddenly like, oh, my God. Like, we've been talking about this for a year, but it was completely changed when he said that to me. And I was just like, oh, this is really going on. Like,
even this question of, like, why do universities have an anti-Semitism? Like, this position of the anti-Semitism. We have to do a show on a position of an anti-Semitism commissioner. But bringing it back to the academic boycott, if I'm not mistaken, there's not a single university or even like department of a university in Germany that has pledged to boycott Israel, right? What about the silent boycott that they were also discussing at the conference? How would you describe that? Is that something that's happening? Is there a silver lining?
Yeah, that's true. Unfortunately, there has been no institute, no university that has pledged to an academic boycott of any form. But I think the academic boycott has an effect in two ways. Like, let's say the end game is always to get your institution to cut ties. That's the best case scenario. But actually, if you push forward the campaign, and this is like in contrast with, I would say, earlier student action, you bring the issue to the people in the university, right? Because if you just ask for solidarity, they will say like, yeah, but I mean, I know it's bad. I think it's terrible what's happening, but it's happening like so far away and so on. And this, like when you bring the problem of the academic boycott and you start like researching ties with the university, you actually show them like, look, this is you come every day and your section is doing this research, right? You are working with the academic who is like doing this joint research with the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, which is an illegal settlement. Like the form of the illegal settlement is not only like the fanatics like in rural areas like harassing like Palestinians with a rifle. Like it's so normalized that illegal settlement is an university, like a university that you can go in exchange, be sent and be paid by the German government to go there. So this is all, and then all this stuff kind of brings back the political problem to the university itself. So then like academics start like double thinking when they are going to go into a project, for example, with an Israeli, in an Israeli institution, and this has had an effect, actually. Like, if you look at the numbers of the Horizon project, the Israeli institutional participation in the Horizon project has dropped dramatically. I don't remember the number right now, but it was like 60% or something like that.
Horizon is a project that connects, just for our listeners, universities in different countries. It's like technically European, but there's a lot of non-European countries in there as well, including Israel. Mm-hmm. And it gives these universities lots of money for different projects. And before the start of like the current full-blown genocide, according to Shahinaz at the conference, Israel was the country with the highest approval rate of their funding applications. So they, by percentage, got most.
Yeah, so I mean, it was a very good business, let's say, to organize a project alongside an Israeli counterpart, like in that context, because it's very likely that you would get like what you are looking for. Right.
I'm sure that this is still the case. I'm sure that in Germany specifically also there are a lot of kind of government-funded bonuses or motivations for universities towards doing cooperations. There definitely have been, and there are ongoing many delegations of university presidents from Germany going to visit Israel.
So this is the bit where we shamelessly ask you, for your support. If you think this content is important and you'd like the podcast to get its wings, consider supporting us on patreon.com/Radio Against Repression. Even a €2 donation helps to keep the lights on. But signing up for a free membership and a 5-star rating would be so appreciated. There is no paywall, and there never will be.
Exactly. Actually, in our report, in the FU report, the FU has specially allocated funding for joint research with academics in the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and it has also joint funding for doing joint courses with the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. So just funding just to do courses like through this online virtual campus. There's a lot of money going like through Horizon Europe and these like inter-European initiatives. But there's also a lot of local money going and connecting. And again, this brings people to illegally occupied land, like for the exchange. It put them in study programs and sometimes even in courses which are maybe led by academics who are like developing AI that is targeting Palestinians, that is developing like weapon direction systems that are like targeting Palestinians, or like just police strategies, right? This is, again, not like some sort of abstract, let's not normalize. I mean, this is an aspect of course, but this is like you as a person can be put in that position, right? Yeah. Your everyday life is impacted by these connections.
Yeah.
And also, so every time, if you're a student, every time something at your university is broken, every time there's a bathroom that's closed or a course that can't get enough money, or like your professors can't, have to quit because their teaching positions is precarious, not paid enough. Think about how there's so much money to do these study programs with universities on stolen land. We slowly have to wrap up because we have an extra little spotlight segment today. But thank you both so much. Is there anything that you would, closing remarks that you would like to add, you two?
Just to wrap up, the effort of the conference, we are all doing this effort in parallel. And the boycott conference was basically an effort to bring everyone together and coordinate like a joint campaign. In this sense, it was a success, but we also have a lot of challenges. I would say the main challenge right now is to bring in sectors which has not jumped into the effort. In the case of, for example, students, it is majority migrant or like foreign student-led. Mm-hmm. So it's, we need like Germans to jump in at some point. And in the academic side, it's very enraging because the academics taking most of the risks are under temporal contracts. And we really need tenured professors, people who have like stable positions. It should be the other way around. They should be shielding the people who are taking these risks, but this is not happening. So like there's a huge task ahead of us, and we need all the help.
Thank you for that. Where can we find you online, or which sort of media are you using? Is it Mastodon yet? I hope so.
Oh no!
Sorry, I put you on the spot. That wasn't fair.
I always fail. I should have prepared this. We have an Instagram account, Academic Boycott.
Yeah. It comes up.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Please help me. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
And we also have the webpage.
We'll link it all in the show notes. Mm-hmm. Zoe, are there any last closing comments?
I guess just basically thank you to the organizers. It's really amazing to see how the student movement has been so courageous and has grown and developed new strategies. And I think that, we're unfortunately living in very interesting times, but at the same time, the values of science and of academia are on the side of the truth. And at this point, it's indisputable. There's a general scientific consensus that what has happened, that what is ongoing is a genocide. So I think that the student movement is going to win. I think that you're right, and history will prove that.
Wonderful. So two final voices from the conference, and then we'll move into the final section. Thank you. Stay with us. Radio Against Repression.
Something that some people already know about, but not everybody knows about, is that the origin of the term boycott, and I guess also probably the practice, comes from the name of an absentee landlord, a British lord who owned a lot of land in Ireland, and the term boycott started when the Irish national struggle, and Parnell, the leader, encouraged that people stopped, buying things or trading with this person, right? And essentially to kind of completely do all of the things that now become what the practice of what boycotting is. So yeah, it's for an incorrigible Fenian bastard like myself. There's, a certain kind of endearment that the term holds. We take a certain pride in it, but it is importantly rooted in the history of anti-colonial struggle and in the kind of logic of land ownership by colonial settlers.
We're here at the conference for Academic Boycott, and I'm standing here with one of the directors of the film Protest Under Pressure. What's your film about?
We're talking about repression, mainly in Germany against universities and in an academic setting, but not only. Like, we tackle basically how the German state is targeting specifically the movement for Palestinian liberation, basically.
So what do you think about the conference so far? What have you seen? What have you enjoyed?
I've been there yesterday for the whole day and the day before too, and I think it's great to have a place that is a bit more relaxed for people to connect also, because if you're just in a protest setting, it's very complicated to actually discuss and build something. So I think that's great to have a space to also just meet people properly, and I think there have been very interesting discussions so far, and I think it's a really important organizing space. But I have also seen that since the beginning there have been cops present, and every day they come with more presents and more cars, more people. They come in more often, so it's a bit open how this is going to end, I guess. But yeah, so far it has been an enjoyable place to be.
What would you tell, say, a university administration if you could tell them anything and they would have to listen?
I think I would tell them that they are cowards and that they are upholding a genocide and apartheid and occupation, and that I wonder how they can look themselves in the mirror sometimes.
Yeah, that was Sophie Birch and Johan Carroll. I'm probably going to mispronounce it, but Sophie Birch is the DJ on NTS from Copenhagen that I look up to very much, and it's Dot and Hav from the album Repair Techniques. And Repair Techniques is what we're going to need a bit of in the next segment as well. Yara, introduce us, will you please, to this?
Yes, so we are now doing a drastic shift of topic, because over the last few weeks, there have been massive protests in Iran, and there, by all account, have been massive amounts of deaths. And I say by all accounts, and we're kind of sitting here very unsure about it because there is very little credible information. There's been a media blackout, social media blackout, and so we really wanted to talk about it. So what we did is we graciously have a recorded segment by Dorna, who is an Iranian socialist from Socialism from Below, who lives here in Berlin. And Dorna graciously did this little roundup of what's been happening in Iran for us. So this is just 10 minutes, just like the basic what's been going on. Because even though, you know, we talk about repression and defunding and censorship here in Germany, I think it's so important to keep an eye really on what's also happening abroad in all these different contexts, not just in Palestine, and to, really, you know, hold up international solidarity.
Yes, and I think it also speaks to the role that technology plays in all of this, because part of the reason that we can't do our own research to verify numbers which are being talked about is that, of course, the internet blackout, but also the reliance on certain forms of infrastructure, which can then be taken away. So this is why I push Mastodon, I push Delta, chat. I know it's like no time for this, but it actually does speak to the current moment explicitly. Anyway, thank you for this, Dorna, and in your own words.
What is happening in Iran? On December 28th, small shopkeepers at Tehran's Grand Bazaar went on strike. Prices had risen so dramatically and the currency had collapsed so badly that they could no longer afford to buy foreign goods, and at the same time they could no longer find customers for their own products. The bazaar is traditionally seen as an early warning system for political upheaval in Iran. That was true in 1979, but also in earlier moments. Historically, bazaar merchants have tended to side with the regime and are considered politically conservative. Because of this, there was initially a lot of uncertainty among organized workers. At first, student and pensioners, who have their own organizations in Iran, joined the protests. After some hesitation, more and more sections of society followed, including worker organizations such as semi-legal trade unions and other civil society groups. Initially, the regime tried to make concessions and described the protests as legitimate. But once workers joined in and the movement quickly went beyond economic demands and began to directly challenge the political foundations of the regime, the tone changed. The regime started calling the protesters insurgents and traitors to the nation. As in previous uprisings over the past 8 years, people began attacking symbols of state power, bases of the Basiji militias, mosques, and shops owned by the Revolutionary Guards. There are videos showing people looting rice from Revolutionary Guard stores and throwing it into the air, a powerful symbol that this struggle is not only about hunger or economic improvements, but also about dignity, equality, and freedom. From the beginning, the slogans included "Death to the dictator," "Freedom, freedom, freedom," Azadi. And this year is the year of blood. Sayyid Ali, meaning Khamenei, will fall. But there were also, in some cases, chants of Javid Shah, meaning long live the Shah. This is new compared to earlier protests. There have been noticeably more calls for the return of the Shah, the former king of Iran. From abroad, Reza Pahlavi, the son of the Shah, who was overthrown in 1979, has tried to influence the protests and has called for demonstrations. He has promised protesters that they have nothing to fear, claiming that he and even the United States and Israel stand with the people in the streets. Similar statements have come from Israel, which claims that Mossad is with the people. It is widely known and well documented that Mossad has infiltrated parts of the Iranian regime, time and again, including during the so-called 12-day war. There have been targeted killings of regime figures and scientists involved in Iran's nuclear program. However, investigations, for example, interviews with journalist Mazdak Azar, show that only 17% of the slogans were connected to Pahlavi or monarchist forces. At the same time, Iranian language media abroad, such as Manoto, Iran International, and BBC Persia were exposed during the protests for using AI-generated fake protest videos largely in favor of the monarchists. Iran International, for example, claimed that 81% of slogans were pro-monarchy. BBC Persia claimed 35%. In reality, it was around 17%, still an increase compared to previous protests, but far from the dominant narrative. Already during the Jinnah movement, a 4-person opposition figurehead emerged in exile around the Shah. It included, or the Crown Prince. It included the actress Golshifteh Farahani, Masih Alinejad, a former parliamentary journalist in Iran, who is now in the US and known for her activism on women's rights, Hamid Esmailion, whose wife and child were killed when Iran shot down a passenger plane in 2020, and Reza Pahlavi. Today it is clear that because there is no strong and visible left-wing opposition abroad, monarchists have achieved political hegemony within the Iranian diaspora. This is also because they receive far more support from media outlets and think tanks than left-wing forces do. Previously, the United States, figures like John Bolton, for example, considered other options. They were meeting with Mujahideen Khalq, the so-called People's Mujahideen of Iran, or the MAK, so-called Islamo-Marxist guerrilla group that has also supported the regime in 1979 by boycotting the constitutional referendum in order to strengthen Khomeini. Now they have, in recent years, played a different role. They have given information on Iran's nuclear program to the United States. This brings us to the role of the left. In 1979, many left-wing organizations, including the Tudeh Party, the majority faction of the Fadayan, and the Mujahideen, which I just spoke about, supported Khomeini's new regime through a so-called Popular Front strategy. The idea was that Iran first needed to cooperate with its own capitalist class to expel American and British imperialism, which had enriched itself for decades through Iranian oil and the exploitation of Iranian workers. Only after establishing a bourgeois capitalist democracy, like those in Germany, France, or the US, could Iran supposedly move towards socialism, or so they thought. This stage-based logic, which contradicts Trotsky's theory of permanent revolution and the ideas put forward by other Marxists such as Lenin and Marx himself, was and remains a product of Stalinism, and it has repeatedly led to crushing defeats of the working class, especially in the 20s and 30s of the previous century. There are still leftists in Iran today, often referred to as the axis of resistance left, Mehvar Muqawamati, who openly side with the regime during, for example, the 12-Day War. Our position from Sozialismus von unten, or socialism from below, who are part of the international socialist tendency, is different. We opposed the US and Israel and wanted them to be defeated, of course, during the 12-Day War, while at the same time giving no political support whatsoever to the Iranian regime. We also refused to say we give military support, because what would it mean? It would mean that we would be in favor of sending arms to Iran, to the regime which is also oppressing its own people. Concretely, this means we oppose deliveries of arms to Israel, which continues to carry out a genocide against Palestinians despite a so-called ceasefire. According to reports from Iran, on January 8th and 9th alone, several thousand people were killed. The regime shut down the internet and carried out what may be one of the largest massacres in the history of the Islamic Republic, hidden in the dark. Estimates range from 20,000 to 30,000 deaths, a number that seems plausible given that almost every Iranian now knows or has seen someone who was killed. It could be even higher. The regime is cornered by international sanctions and war. Its so-called axis of resistance has been dismantled piece by piece, revealing the weakness of bourgeois capitalist anti-imperialism. The regime supported forces in Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, and Palestine financially and militarily, forces that relied not on mass activity from below, but a purely military strategy. This is because their politics is bourgeois and not socialist. In Iran itself, an estimated 50 to 75% of the economy is controlled by the Revolutionary Guards. They are the armed wing of the regime, operating alongside the regular military, enforcing the interests of the ruling class through violence at home and abroad. Unlike many other revolutions, where the military split and parts switched sides, this is extremely difficult in Iran, because the Revolutionary Guards are not only soldiers, but are the country's biggest oligarchs. The outlook for Iran's working class is bleak. Time and again, workers have tried, through strikes and protests, to overthrow this bloody regime. Like many revolutionary movements in sub-imperialist countries that are not on the top of the capitalist food chain like Germany or the US, Iranian workers face not only their own ruling class, but also the far more powerful ruling class of the US, Germany, Israel, and others, all of whom want regime change in Iran. Over the past 2 years, Israel, the watchdog of US imperialism in the Middle East, has used extreme violence to clear the path for the hegemony of American corporations. Francesca Albanese's report on the political economy of the genocide in Palestine shows clearly that US, German, and even Chinese companies profit from Israel's settler colonial project. So what should our perspectives be? We stand for mass activity by workers worldwide. When our rulers wage war against the rulers of another weaker country, we oppose it unconditionally, because the main enemy is at home. But when workers in those countries rise up against their own rulers, we stand in solidarity with them and try to strengthen the left there with socialist ideas, and of course other ways of support. Right now, US warships are positioned around Iran. We have clearly condemned this through demonstrations and speeches, because this so-called dirty work, as Friedrich Merz described Israel's attack on Iran, primarily hits innocent civilians. And secondly, it goes hand in hand with an authoritarian turn at home. Attacks on workers through social cuts, propaganda, censorship, massive police violence, and military spending instead of funding education, healthcare, and pensions. We have to break with this capitalist logic and organize resistance from below internationally. Long live socialism from below.
Thank you. That was Dorna from Socialism from Below. Thank you for giving us this overview over what's happening in Iran from a socialist, diasporan, Iranian perspective and putting it into context of what's happening worldwide. That was Radio Against Repression. Thank you all so much for listening. This is the Radio Hour around repression, censorship, and defunding. Go find us on Patreon. Go find us on Instagram. We have a new Instagram, Radio Against Repression. You can no longer actually find us on Spotify because we have decided to move off that complicit website and instead are doing our hosting ourselves now. You can find us on a bunch of different platforms, and for that we also have a little fundraiser because it does actually cost money to keep these episodes up in a podcast form. So if you like the work we're doing, go find our fundraiser and drop us, even €5 helps. And go follow the Academic Boycott Conference, the Interbündnis, BDSFU, Crisol, all of these amazing things. Full solidarity with people resisting repressive regimes worldwide, be that in Iran, in Palestine, in the US right now, in Venezuela. Join us for our next show with Alice Grisha and Andreas Siegmann. We'll be talking about compassionate detachment. And that will be on the 18th of February. We are doing 2 shows this month. Look at us ramping it up. We're here all the time. And have a good afternoon.